She said it so casually. Not even angry, really. Just flat, like she was commenting on the weather. "Dad, we didn't sign up to be your nurses." And I was lying there in my own bed, in the house I'd built with 40 years of early mornings and late nights, 3 days out of the hospital after a stroke that nearly killed me. And my daughter was explaining to me why she couldn't bring up a bowl of soup from the kitchen downstairs. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the water stain on the ceiling, the one I'd been meaning to fix since the previous spring. And I thought, this is what it comes to. My name is Leonard and I'm 68 years old. I worked 32 years for the city of Toronto in infrastructure planning. My wife Beverly and I raised our daughter Tara in the house where I still live. A detached 2-story in Mississauga, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from driveways and kids still ride bikes after dinner. Beverly passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. Tara was 27 at the time. I thought losing her mother would draw us closer. For a while, it did. Tara met her husband, Kyle, the year after Beverly died. He came from money, or so he liked to imply. He talked a lot about investment opportunities and had the kind of handshake where he grips just a little too long and looks just over your shoulder while he does it. I didn't trust him from the start, but Tara loved him, and I told myself I was being the overprotective father. I told myself that for 3 years. When they got married, Beverly's mother, my mother-in-law Edna, who had loved Tara like her own, pulled me aside at the reception and said quietly, "Watch that one, Lenny." I laughed it off. I wish I hadn't. 2 years into their marriage, Kyle's so-called investment business collapsed. I never understood exactly what it was he did. Something involving private equity and a partner who apparently walked away with most of the capital. But the result was clear enough. They were broke. Not struggling, not tight, broke. Behind on the mortgage for their condo in Etobicoke, Kyle's car repossessed, Tara's credit cards maxed. They came to me on a Sunday afternoon in October, sat across from me at my kitchen table, and laid it all out. I didn't make them beg. That's not who I am. Beverly would have done the same. I told them they could move into the house. The basement was already finished. 2 bedrooms, a full bath, a laundry room, its own entrance from the side yard. I told them they could stay rent-free while they got back on their feet, and that the only thing I asked was that we treat each other with basic decency. Kyle nodded along and said, "Of course, Leonard, we really appreciate this." He called me Leonard. Beverly's name for me was Lenny. My friends call me Len. I let it go. For the first few months, it was fine. Then fine became tense, and tense became something else entirely. It started with small things. Kyle taking up both parking spots in the driveway, mine and theirs, and leaving my car wedged at the curb during a February that brought 2 ice storms back to back. Tara using my washer and dryer at all hours, including 11 o'clock at night when I was trying to sleep, and then leaving the machines full of wet clothes for days. Kyle cooking elaborate meals that left the shared kitchen, which I had let them use freely, against my better instinct, covered in grease and dishes that sat until I washed them myself. I mentioned it once, just once, calmly, the way my father taught me to raise issues with people you have to keep living with. I said to Tara, over a cup of coffee one morning, that I needed them to clean up the kitchen when they used it. She sighed like a teenager. She said, "We're adults, Dad. We're not dirty people. Maybe your standards are just really high." And then Kyle came upstairs and she didn't say another word about it. 6 months in, I had the mild stroke. I want to be clear about what a mild stroke is, because people hear the word mild and they assume it means minor. It is not minor. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing my breakfast dishes when the right side of my face went numb and the mug I was holding slipped out of my hand and shattered on the tile. I tried to call out, but my words came out slurred and strange. I managed to get to the phone on the counter and dial 911 before I slid down the cabinet to the floor. The paramedics were there in 7 minutes. I remember the sound of the front door opening and then nothing until the hospital. I was in St. Michael's for 5 days. The neurologist explained that there was no permanent damage but that the recovery period was critical, no stress, adequate rest, no heavy lifting or sudden exertion, medications taken on schedule, and follow-up appointments every 2 weeks. He was a patient man, and he explained it all twice because I asked him to. I was scared. I don't mind admitting that. Tara was there on the day I was discharged. Kyle picked us up in the car, my car I realized, because his had never been replaced, and drove me home. Tara held my arm up the front steps and said, "We'll take good care of you, Dad." And I believed her. The first evening was all right. Someone had made dinner, soup and bread, nothing fancy but warm, and Tara brought it up to my room and sat with me for a while. We talked a little about her mother, about how Beverly used to fuss over me when I was sick, how she'd read aloud from a mystery novel she knew I didn't like, just to have something to do while she was sitting with me. Tara laughed at that, and for a moment it was like breathing regular air again after a long time underwater. By the second morning it was over. I came downstairs, carefully, one step at a time, holding the rail. Because I wanted a glass of water and I couldn't find the bottle my doctor had given me with the medication schedule. I thought I might have left it in the kitchen. Tara and Kyle were at the table having breakfast. I said good morning. Kyle looked up, looked back at his phone. Tara gave me a thin smile and asked if I needed something. I said I was looking for my medication sheet and could use a glass of water while I was there. Kyle didn't look up. Tara said, "It's right there on the counter, Dad," and pointed and then turned back to whatever she and Kyle were talking about. I got the sheet. I got my own glass of water. I went back upstairs. That afternoon, I heard them through the floor. Sound travels differently when the house is quiet. And Kyle was saying something about how long this was going to take, and Tara said, "I don't know. Could be weeks." And Kyle said something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone of it tightened something in my chest. On the third day, I knocked on the basement door and asked Tara if she could help me with something. I needed to get a box down from the top shelf of my closet, a box with some important papers in it, and I couldn't reach up without risking a fall. She came up, got the box, set it on my bed, and was back down the stairs before I'd finished thanking her. I heard the basement door close. I heard the lock click. They had started locking their door. Over the next week, I tracked what was happening as clearly as I could from my room. Tara came up once a day, sometimes not even that. Kyle came up not at all. The medications were mine to manage. Meals were mine to arrange. On day 6, I called down from the top of the stairs to ask if anyone could bring me some crackers and cheese. My stomach wasn't settled enough for a real meal, and I didn't trust myself on the stairs twice in one day. Tara called back. "We're in the middle of something," and nothing came. I ordered delivery from the pharmacy app for my prescriptions and from a grocery delivery service for food. I charged it all to my account. On the 9th day after I came home, I slipped on the bathroom tile, not a fall, barely even a stumble, but enough to scare me badly, and I knocked on the floor 3 times with the end of my cane, which was our agreed signal if I needed help quickly. We had agreed on this signal before I'd been discharged. Tara had suggested it. Nothing came for 17 minutes. I timed it, because there wasn't much else to do while I sat on the edge of the tub, waiting to feel safe enough to stand. When Tara finally came up, she stood in the bathroom doorway with her arms crossed and said, "Dad, you have to understand. We have our own lives to manage. We can't just drop everything every time you knock." I looked at her. I thought about the 22 hours of labor her mother had endured bringing her into the world. I thought about the orthodontics and the school trips and the used car we bought and repaired and eventually passed along to her when she turned 18. I thought about the tuition we'd helped with, and the down payment we'd contributed toward her first apartment, and the Sunday dinners for 3 years running, and the $10,000 I'd quietly sent when Kyle's business collapsed. Before any of this, money I'd never asked back for and had never been acknowledged. I said very quietly, "All right." 2 days later, I called my doctor's office and arranged for a home care assessment. There was a wait, but they could fit me in within the week. When I mentioned to Tara that a home care worker would be coming to the house, the reaction was immediate. "You can't just have strangers in the house without talking to us first," she said. "This is our home too." I let that sentence sit between us for a moment. Then I said, "No, it isn't." She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was 16, and I'd said something she didn't like. Then she went downstairs and I heard her on the phone with Kyle. That evening, they both came up, which was unusual enough that I felt my heartbeat pick up in a way that was not good for me medically. Kyle sat in the chair by my window like he owned it, because that's how Kyle sits anywhere. And Tara sat on the edge of my bed and explained to me, in a tone that was almost kind, that they'd been talking and they thought it might be better for everyone if the house were put in both our names. That way, they said, we'd all feel more secure. They'd feel like they had stability, and I would have help from people who actually cared about me rather than paid strangers. I asked how that arrangement would affect my mortgage, which I had refinanced 2 years prior and had 11 years remaining on. Kyle said, "That's something we'd sort out together." I said I needed to think about it. He said he understood and smiled, and I noticed he didn't stand up from the chair until Tara stood from the bed. That night I called my lawyer. I've had the same lawyer for 21 years. His name is Robert Finch, and he works out of a small office on Queen Street West that always smells faintly of old paper and coffee. He's a quiet man who speaks slowly and always thinks before he says anything, which is the kind of lawyer I trust completely. I told him what had happened, all of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done there was a brief silence. Then he said, "Len, I want you to come in tomorrow." I said I wasn't sure I should be taking taxis yet, and he said he would come to me. He arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock while Tara and Kyle were both out. Kyle supposedly at a job interview. Tara at a yoga class she'd started attending 3 times a week during a period when she'd told me she was too busy to bring me soup. Robert sat at my kitchen table and put a folder in front of me. Inside the folder was the rental agreement. When Tara and Kyle had moved in, 18 months prior, Robert had drawn up a document at my request. I had explained to Tara that I wanted it to be formal, not because I didn't trust her, I'd said, but because I believed that clear agreements made for better relationships. She'd seemed slightly annoyed but had signed without really reading it. Kyle had signed as well. I had filed it away and honestly hadn't thought about it much since. Robert walked me through it. The agreement stipulated that Tara and Kyle were tenants of the basement unit at 0 rent, in exchange for reasonable assistance with household maintenance and care of the primary resident in the event of health emergency or incapacity. There was a clause. Robert's language was careful and specific, that defined reasonable assistance as not less than twice daily check-ins during any period of medical recovery, assistance with meals during periods of incapacity, and co-management of any home care arrangements requested by the primary resident. There was also a termination clause. If tenants failed to meet their obligations as defined, the primary resident retained the right to terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice, or, in cases of documented failure of care, with 72 hours. I read it twice. I said, I had forgotten about the care clause. Robert said, I know, I hadn't. He had, it turned out, been keeping records, not on his own initiative, but because 2 weeks after I'd come home from hospital, I had sent him 3 emails describing what was happening. I don't fully remember doing this. Those first weeks are blurry around the edges, but apparently I had. The emails, which he printed out and added to the folder, documented in my own words, the dates and times of each failure, the meal I'd been denied, the 17 minutes on the bathroom floor, the conversation where Tara had explained that she couldn't drop everything every time I knocked. He told me that based on the agreement and the documented failures, I had sufficient grounds to initiate the 72-hour termination. I asked what would happen if they refused to leave. He said that as tenants under a signed rental agreement, even one with zero rent, they had rights under the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act, but that the documented failure of their care obligations substantially strengthened my position. He said it would not be immediate. He said there might be disputes. But he said, looking at me over the top of his reading glasses, "You have a solid case, Len. You have a case in writing, in their own signatures." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked him what I should do first. He said I should start by sending the formal notice through him, by registered mail to the address, which was my address, and also by email, so there was a timestamp. He said I should not confront them directly without him present, which I appreciated because I knew myself well enough to know that I was angry in a way that was quiet and cold and had been building for months, and I was not sure what I would say if Kyle looked at me the way he sometimes did. The notice went out that afternoon. Robert sent it. I don't know exactly when Tara received it, because I didn't see her until the following evening, when she came upstairs without knocking, which she never did anymore, and stood in my doorway with the printed email in her hand. She said, "What is this?" I said, "It's a formal notice of tenancy termination. Robert can explain the details." She said, "You're kicking us out after everything we've done for you." I want to tell you what happened in that moment, because I've thought about it many times since. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't feel the urge to. I felt something settle in me, the way tension leaves a room when a window is finally opened. I said, "Tara, what have you done for me?" She started to answer. She said something about being there, about giving up their privacy, about how hard the last 18 months had been. And I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. And then when she paused, I said, "I have it in writing. Robert has the documentation. If you'd like to discuss it with him, I can give you his number." She left. I heard her on the phone with Kyle within minutes, and his voice carried up through the floor, loud and certain, the way his voice always was, and I heard him say something about a lawyer of their own. I didn't move from my chair. Kyle came upstairs the next morning. I'll give him this, he came alone, without Tara, and he sat down across from me without his usual performance. He looked tired. He asked me. And this is the part that stayed with me. He asked me if there was any way to work this out without it becoming a legal matter. I asked him what he had in mind. He said they would do better, that they understood now that things had gotten out of hand and that they had not treated me right. He said, and I believe he meant it, at least in that moment, "We should have been there for you, Leonard. I'm sorry." I thought about it. I want to be honest about that. I did think about it. Then I thought about 70 minutes on the bathroom floor. I thought about we didn't sign up to be your nurses. I thought about Kyle's hand on the back of that chair, the chair by my window, the one Beverly used to sit in when she read. I said, "I appreciate that. I do. But I think the agreement Robert drew up is the right way forward." The 72 hours passed. They left on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the notice was sent. It took longer than the agreement technically required because I let Robert handle the pace and because I genuinely did not want a scene. They took what was theirs from the basement. Kyle loaded a rented cargo van. Tara did not come upstairs to say goodbye. I heard the side door close, and then the van start, and then nothing. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. I had a cup of tea. I looked out at the backyard, at the bird feeder Beverly had put up the spring before she got sick, which I had kept filled every winter since. There were 2 chickadees on it, swinging in the cold. The home care worker, a woman named June who had a no-nonsense manner and very good practical sense, started the following Monday. She came 3 mornings a week, helped me with my medication schedule, made sure the kitchen stayed functional, and occasionally sat with me over coffee and talked about absolutely nothing in particular, which I found, unexpectedly, to be exactly what I needed. I spoke to Tara 4 months later. She called from a new number. I didn't know if she and Kyle were still together, and I didn't ask. She said she was sorry. Not the complicated, self-defending kind of sorry that means I'm sorry you feel that way. Just sorry. She cried a little. I let her talk. I don't know what comes next between us. I'm not a man who writes people off easily. I am 68. I've buried a wife, and I know how much can change in a year, in a season, in a morning. But I also know that something had to change, and it did, and I was the one who had to make it change. Alone on a Tuesday afternoon in my kitchen with a folder of documents and 40 years of learning when to speak quietly and when to let the silence do the work. I kept the bird feeder full through that whole winter. The chickadees came back every morning, reliable and small and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened inside the house, and I found I was glad to see them. I've been sitting with this for a long time now, trying to understand how things between Tara and me got to that point. I don't think it happened all at once. It never does. It was a slow drift, one small choice at a time, on her part, on Kyle's, and if I'm being honest, on mine too. I let things go that I should have named earlier. I told myself that generosity meant staying quiet. It doesn't. What I've come to understand is that how we treat people when they are at their most vulnerable, when they cannot easily walk away, when they need help they cannot provide for themselves. That is the truest measure of who we actually are, not who we intend to be, not the version of ourselves we present at family dinners or describe to friends, the version that shows up, or doesn't, at 17 minutes past the moment someone knocked 3 times on the floor. Tara is not a bad person. I believe that, but somewhere in those 18 months, she stopped making the effort that goodness requires, and she let Kyle's impatience become her own. And that is a failure of character she will have to reckon with herself in her own time. I cannot do that work for her. I couldn't do it when she was 16, and I can't do it now. What I could do, what I did do, was refuse to pretend it wasn't happening. That took something I hadn't expected to need at 68. The willingness to act on what I knew, even when acting on it was painful. Robert's folder sat in my kitchen and it told the truth plainly, and I had to decide whether I was the kind of man who would use the truth or the kind who would fold it back up and file it away because the alternative was too uncomfortable. I'd spent my whole career in city planning making decisions based on what the evidence actually said, rather than what people wished it said. I applied the same standard to my own life, and it cost me something real. But here is what I keep coming back to. I had prepared, not out of suspicion, not out of pessimism, but because Robert had quietly insisted on clarity when I might have waved it away. That document existed because, 21 years ago, I had chosen a lawyer who thought further ahead than I did in that moment, and because I had trusted him enough to let him do his job. Good judgment is not just instinct. It is also who you surround yourself with, and whether you listen to them. There is a kind of quiet stubbornness required to get through something like this. Not bitterness, not righteousness, just a steady refusal to abandon yourself entirely in the name of keeping the peace. I kept filling that bird feeder through the whole winter. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. It was a daily decision to maintain something, to show up for something. Even when showing up felt like it cost more than I had, that habit of maintenance, of not letting the small good things go to ruin just because the larger things had, kept me in better shape than I might otherwise have been. I don't know what Tara and I will build from here. I'm open to it. But I know that whatever comes next will be built on something honest, or it will not be built at all.